A German woman stood in a Canadian military kitchen in August 1945, staring at golden circles of fried dough dusted with sugar. Her hands trembled as she turned to the cook and asked a question that would echo through decades. "Is this pig food?" She meant it seriously. After years of starvation rations and propaganda about Allied weakness, the abundance seemed impossible. What happened next would shatter everything she believed about the war, about the enemy, about reality itself. May 1945. Northwestern Germany was collapsing like a building with its foundation blown out. Greta Hoffmann, 28 years old, former schoolteacher from Hamburg, sat in a communications bunker wearing the gray-blue uniform of a Luftwaffe auxiliary. She'd volunteered in 1943, believing with absolute certainty that Germany would win. Superior people, superior nation, destiny written in blood and iron. Now, British tanks were rolling closer. Hitler had killed himself 6 days ago, though nobody dared say it aloud. The radio had gone silent. Everything Greta built her life around was crumbling, but she clung to ideology like a drowning person clutching debris. 19-year-old Anneliese Weber sat beside her, gripping a photograph of her fiancé Klaus. Everyone called her Liesel. She came from a Bavarian farm, green hills, and her mother's vegetable garden, until bombs fell on her village in 1944. The government conscripted her that same month. They put her on anti-aircraft guns, shooting at British planes while terror froze her hands every single day. Klaus was missing somewhere on the Eastern Front, 4 months without word. Dr. Margarete Vogel stood by the window, watching smoke rise from a nearby town. 34, chemist, Berlin-trained. Her husband died at Stalingrad in 1943. Her children, Anna and Thomas, were with relatives in Austria. At least she hoped they were. She hadn't seen them in over a year. Margaret was smart enough to know what Greta refused to see. Germany had lost. The question now was survival, and every answer looked terrible. They'd been warned about capture. The propaganda films showed British soldiers as murderers. Roosevelt kept execution lists, the newspapers claimed. Goebbels himself had broadcast days ago that death was better than Allied captivity. The women were military auxiliaries, which meant they wore uniforms and operated weapons. Combatants under international law. They could be executed as war criminals. Or worse. Nobody said exactly what worse meant, but everyone understood. May 8th arrived with artillery thunder in the distance. Victory in Europe Day for the Allies, Surrender Day for Germany. The Luftwaffe communications base near Oldenburg was surrounded. 127 women, a handful of male officers. Most of the men fled during the night. 2 committed suicide. The women were ordered to destroy everything and disperse, but there was nowhere to go. Refugees clogged the roads. Cities were rubble. Soviet forces held the east. British and Canadian forces held the west. Greta, Liesel, and Margaret hid in a bombed-out school basement with 40 other women. No food, broken water pipes. 36 hours listening to tanks rumble past. Foreign voices speaking English. On the morning of May 10th, they decided. Stay hidden and starve, or surrender and face whatever came next. They walked out carrying white flags made from torn bedsheets. The Canadian soldiers who found them looked shocked. Young men, maybe 20 years old, holding rifles and staring at German women in military uniforms. One soldier, his face still spotted with teenage acne, lowered his rifle and said something in English. His tone wasn't cruel. He sounded confused, maybe even concerned. He called for an officer. The British and Canadians debated for hours. These weren't civilians. They wore uniforms. They'd operated weapons. Under the Geneva Convention, they were prisoners of war. Finally, the decision came. They'd be processed and shipped to Canada. Canada. The word meant nothing to most of the women. Somewhere far away, across an ocean. Cold, they'd heard, empty wilderness. Why there? Why so far? They were marched to a temporary holding area, a former German barracks now controlled by Allied forces. Canadian guards, older men with gray hair and kind faces, watched over them. The guards didn't seem threatening, but Greta warned the others anyway. Stay strong. Remember your training. Don't trust their fake kindness. It's a trap. They want us to lower our guard, believe we're safe, and then they'll strike. That night, Greta, Lisel, and Margaret sat together in a crowded room. 127 women, ages 17 to 41. 23 had served in anti-aircraft units like Lisel. 89 had worked in communications and signals like Greta. 15 had administrative or medical roles. Now they were all the same. Prisoners, defeated, facing an unknown future. They made a pact, the three of them. Whatever happens, we look out for each other. We survived this together. Lisel held her photograph of Klaus and prayed he was alive somewhere, being treated well by whoever had captured him. Margaret thought of her children and wondered if she'd ever see them again. Greta stared at the ceiling and told herself the same thing over and over. Germany is superior. We will rise again. This is temporary. But deep down, in a place she refused to examine, doubt whispered like smoke through cracks in a wall. The next morning, they were told they'd leave soon. Destination, Canada. A prisoner of war camp somewhere in a place called Alberta. They'd be shipped across the Atlantic Ocean, farther from home than any of them had ever been, farther from everything they knew, into the hands of the enemy. None of them knew about the donuts yet. None of them could imagine what was coming, the kindness that would break them open, the abundance that would shatter their understanding of the world. The first week felt like walking through a dream that made no sense. British soldiers in Lubeck processed them with efficiency that seemed almost bored. Medical exams came next, conducted by female doctors who spoke kindly in broken German. Liesel had never been examined by a woman doctor before. The doctor gave her clean undergarments afterward, like it was normal to care about a prisoner's dignity. Soap appeared, bars of it that smelled like flowers, towels that were soft and white. The women were deloused, given clean uniforms, assigned to barracks with working toilets and beds with actual mattresses. Greta refused to trust any of it. "They're fattening us up for propaganda photos before the executions," she insisted. But even Greta couldn't ignore the food. British military rations arrived 3 times daily. Porridge with real milk, soup with chunks of meat, bread that wasn't mixed with sawdust. More food than any of them had seen in months, maybe years. Liesel ate slowly, terrified she'd get sick. Her stomach had shrunk from rationing. Margaret watched everything with calculating eyes. This doesn't match the propaganda. Nothing about this matches what we were told. Mid-June brought the ship. They were loaded onto a converted troop transport in Hamburg Harbor, alongside thousands of male prisoners. The destination was finally revealed. Canada. Panic rippled through the women. Why so far? It must be labor camps in the frozen wilderness. Why else ship prisoners across an entire ocean? The women occupied separate quarters, a converted cargo hold with rows of metal bunks. 127 women in their section. Nearly 3,000 total prisoners aboard. The guards were mostly older men, gray-haired and weathered. Veterans, someone whispered. Men who'd fought in the First War, now too old for combat. They carried rifles but seemed relaxed, almost bored. One guard with kind eyes and a thick mustache showed them the latrines. explained the meal schedule in slow, simple English. Margaret translated. 2 meals daily, medical bay if you get sick, 12 days to cross the Atlantic. Lisel had an infected cut on her hand from falling during the surrender. The debris had been sharp, the wound wasn't healing. On the 3rd day, she gathered courage and asked to see the medic. The Canadian guard who escorted her was young, maybe 25, with red hair and freckles. He smiled and said something cheerful in English she didn't understand. The medic cleaned her wound carefully, applied sulfanilamide powder, wrapped it in clean white bandages. He was gentle, professional, even made a joke in broken German. "You'll be fine, miss." The medicine probably cost more than her entire month's ration back home. They just gave it to her. A prisoner, the enemy. The food on the ship was strange and abundant. Twice daily they lined up for metal trays filled with portions that seemed impossible. Porridge with milk and sugar for breakfast. Real sugar, white and sweet, not the bitter substitute they'd used in Germany. Soup with meat and vegetables for dinner. Fresh bread with butter. Real butter, yellow and soft, not the gray ersatz spread that tasted like floor wax. Margaret did calculations in her head. Approximately 2,800 calories per day. More than German officers had received even before the shortages got bad. The ship was clean, well maintained. The guards had new uniforms and good boots. Liesel noticed this because German forces had suffered terrible supply shortages for 2 years. Soldiers went without proper boots. Uniforms fell apart. But these guards, these men from a country that had just fought a 6-year war, looked like they had everything they needed and more. One guard even shared his cigarettes with male prisoners. Real tobacco from a brand called Export A. Liesel overheard guards complaining about the food, wishing for their mother's cooking. They took this abundance completely for granted, as if it was normal to have enough of everything. Mid-crossing, the seas got rough. Many prisoners became seasick, including Liesel. She lay in her bunk, miserable, unable to keep anything down. The guards brought extra buckets, fresh water, wet cloths. A guard named Corporal Mackenzie, a farmer from somewhere called Saskatchewan, checked on the women several times. He had a weathered face and gentle hands. "Canada, good place," he told Liesel in simple English, using hand gestures to help her understand. "You will see. No war there. War done." Liesel wanted to believe he was lying, but his kindness seemed so genuine. Why would he bother comforting a prisoner if he planned to harm her later? The whispered conversations started in the bunks at night. If they're going to execute us, why give us medicine? Why feed us so well? Why treat us like people? Greta forbade the others from fraternizing with guards, from trusting anything. But even Greta was beginning to look confused. Margaret wrote in a hidden diary she'd started keeping using pencil on scraps of paper. Nothing makes sense. Everything we were told was about starvation and cruelty. This is neither. What does it mean? On June 25th, the ship arrived in Halifax. The women crowded at windows looking through mesh coverings at their first sight of Canada. The port was modern, busy, completely intact. No bomb craters, no ruined buildings. Civilians walked around doing normal things. Shopping, talking, going about their lives. Children played on the dock. Women carried packages. Electric lights blazed everywhere, even in daylight, like it cost nothing. Germany had lived under blackout conditions and power shortages for years. This place looked like the war had never touched it at all. Liesel pressed her face close to the mesh and whispered, "It looks untouched." Margaret stood beside her and said nothing, but her mind was working. Untouched meant resources. Untouched meant industrial capacity. Untouched meant power that Germany never had, not even at the height of the Reich. They were loaded onto trains, the women in separate cars. The locomotive pulled away from Halifax, heading west toward somewhere called Alberta. The journey would take 3 days. Through mesh-covered windows, they would see a country so vast and wealthy, it would break their understanding of the world. The train rolled west for 3 days and 3 nights. The women were allowed to look out the windows, though mesh coverings blocked any escape. What they saw through that mesh changed everything they thought they knew about the war. Endless forests stretched in every direction, thick with trees that had never been bombed. Lakes sparkled in the sunlight, clean and blue. Farmland rolled past mile after mile with crops growing green and healthy. The fields looked prosperous, well-tended, abundant. Small towns appeared and disappeared, each one intact, each one bustling with normal life. Modern cars drove down streets. Stores had full windows. People looked well-fed, going about their business like war was something happening on another planet. Margaret pressed her face to the mesh and tried to understand. "No ruins," she whispered. "No bomb craters. Just abundance." The train passed through Montreal at night and the city blazed with electric lights. Thousands of lights burning freely, as if electricity cost nothing. And blackouts weren't even a concept. Toronto came next, just as bright, just as busy. Liesel watched families walking together on streets, children playing, women carrying shopping bags that looked heavy with goods. Real goods, not ration cards and empty shelves. The scale of it sank in slowly, like cold water seeping through cloth. Canada wasn't just safe from the war. Canada was vast. The train had been traveling for 3 full days, and they were still nowhere near the western edge. Back home, you could cross all of Germany in less time. This place went on forever, protected by an ocean, untouched by bombs, wealthy in ways that made German propaganda about Allied weakness look like the obvious lies they were. On June 28th, the train pulled into Lethbridge, Alberta. The camp spread across 40 acres of flat prairie land, surrounded by a single line of barbed wire fence. Guard towers stood at the corners, but the guards inside them looked bored, not alert. Wooden barracks buildings painted brown and white formed neat rows inside the fence. There was a central area with a large mess hall, an infirmary building with a red cross on the roof, a recreation building, and even a chapel with a small steeple. "Real flush toilets," someone whispered. Running water. Electric lights throughout. It looked like a small military town, organized and maintained, not a prison camp where people were meant to suffer. The women were processed one by one. Each received a prisoner of war number. Photographs were taken for Red Cross documentation, official records that followed Geneva Convention requirements. Then came the supplies. 2 sets of coveralls made from Canadian military surplus, clean and intact with no holes. New undergarments and socks. Toiletries in a small cloth bag. Soap, a toothbrush, actual toothpaste, and a comb. Bedding included a real mattress, sheets that smelled like laundry soap, a wool blanket, and a pillow. A pillow. Liesel held hers and felt tears sting her eyes. She hadn't slept on a pillow in over a year. A Canadian Army nurse conducted medical examinations, professional and respectful. She spoke no German but smiled and worked gently. After delousing, though most had already been processed in Germany, the women were led to their barracks. The women's section consisted of 4 wooden buildings, each designed to hold 35 people. Greta, Liesel, and Margaret were assigned to barracks B2 along with 32 others. Inside, rows of metal frame beds lined both walls. Each bed had a real mattress, not a straw tick. Each had a footlocker for personal items. A wood-burning stove sat in the center for heat. Windows had both screens and glass, actual glass that could be opened or closed. Electric lights hung from the ceiling, controlled by switches on the wall. The common washroom held 6 sinks with running water, 4 shower stalls with hot water that actually worked, and 6 toilets that flushed. It was cleaner and better equipped than the barracks they'd lived in while serving the Luftwaffe. At 6 that evening, a bell rang for dinner. The women walked to the mess hall, nervous and unsure. Long tables with benches filled the space. Canadian cooks worked behind a serving line. The smell hit first, rich and meaty and completely overwhelming. Beef stew with vegetables bubbled in huge pots. Actual chunks of beef, not gristle or mystery meat. Fresh white bread, soft and warm, sat in baskets with real butter in small pots beside them. Boiled potatoes steamed on trays, canned corn, bright yellow and sweet-smelling. And for dessert, apple pie with flaky crust and cinnamon that filled the air. Each woman received a metal tray and utensils. Metal forks and spoons, not wooden substitutes. The cook served generous portions, and when one woman hesitated, the cook gestured that she could have more if she wanted. Seconds were available. Unlimited. There was fresh milk to drink, or coffee that smelled like actual coffee beans, not roasted grain. The women sat down in stunned silence. Liesel stared at her tray and started crying. She hadn't seen this much food since before the war started, maybe never in her life all at once like this. Helena, a 23-year-old from Dresden, looked at the meat and vegetables and milk and pie, and her eyes rolled back. She fainted right there at the table, her body unable to process the combination of shock and months of near starvation. Greta refused to eat at first. "It's drugged," she said firmly. "Or it's a trick. They'll take it away. They'll punish us for eating." But hunger was stronger than ideology. She picked up her fork and tasted the stew. The beef was tender, seasoned with salt and herbs. The vegetables were real carrots and potatoes and onions, not turnips and grass. She ate, and so did everyone else. Many got sick afterward, their shrunken stomachs rebelling against the sudden abundance. The numbers told the story. This single meal contained more calories than German civilians saw in 2 days. The prisoners were being fed better than German soldiers had eaten, better than most German civilians had eaten in years. The camp held 12,627 total prisoners. That meant the Canadians were feeding over 12,000 enemy soldiers this way every single day, by choice, because a treaty signed in Geneva said they had to treat prisoners humanely. That night, lying in real beds under wool blankets in a heated building with electric lights, the women whispered to each other in the darkness. "Why are they feeding us like this?" one woman asked. "The guards haven't touched anyone, haven't even threatened," another said. "This is better than our billets in the Luftwaffe," a third added quietly. "Maybe the propaganda was wrong," someone suggested, and the words hung in the air like smoke. Greta maintained the party line even as uncertainty crept into her voice. "They need us healthy for labor," she said, "or for propaganda." But even she sounded less sure than before. She ordered lights out and told the women to stay alert, stay vigilant, stay German. Margaret lay awake, her mind working through everything she'd seen. Bombed Berlin with its rubble and rats and starving children. The journey across untouched Canada. This camp with its abundance and rules and basic human decency. She thought about industrial capacity and resources and the simple mathematics of war. We fought giants, she realized. We fought industrial titans while already on our knees. And they're treating us according to law, feeding us, housing us, as if we still matter as human beings. She fell asleep on a full stomach for the first time in 18 months. Liesel clutched her photograph of Klaus and prayed he was alive somewhere, being treated this well by whoever held him. "Maybe we'll be okay," she whispered into the darkness. "Maybe." Dawn came through the barracks window, gold and gentle. There were no air raid sirens, no bombs, no fear. Just prairie silence and the impossible gift of safety.